The UK has recorded the highest daily coronavirus death toll since the start of the pandemic.
The patients just keep coming.
The UK has passed another grim milestone, with the number of people dying now over 80,000.
This is a very perilous moment.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. People in the United Kingdom are now being warned by their government and their medical advisors that they are living through the worst weeks of the pandemic. More cases than ever, more deaths than ever. A perilous moment, says the Prime Minister. And what's really troubling is that thousands more are expected to die with their chance to be vaccinated just weeks or perhaps even a few months away, which is why we still urgently need effective treatments. And today we're joined by an eminent British professor who believes he came up with an idea for an effective treatment right at the beginning of the pandemic, but is still struggling to get it tested in the United Kingdom. He is Professor Sir Christopher Edwards, a renowned endocrinologist and an emeritus professor and research fellow at Imperial College. He was knighted by the Queen for services to medical science in 2008. Now we'll be hearing from Sir Christopher in just a moment, but first this quick report and summary of what is going on in the United Kingdom right now. The UK is in lockdown for the third time. Millions of adults have been forced to work from home, millions of children the same. Restaurants and non-essential shops are all closed. No one's really sure when this will end. People's nerves are frayed.
Social distance now, get back!
The government believes this is all necessary because the coronavirus is spreading so fast that even the famous National Health Service may soon be overwhelmed.
If action is not taken, NHS capacity may be overwhelmed within 21 days.
And the numbers are dreadful. The UK now reports more new cases than any other country in the world except America and Brazil. Interestingly, China, where the virus originated, is reporting far fewer new cases, ranked around 100. The UK government estimates 1 in 50 people in England now have the virus. In some parts of London, it's more like 1 in 30. That's more than 1.6 million active cases nationwide. More than 84,000 people have now died with COVID-19 across the UK since the first cases were identified almost exactly a year ago. The UK now has the 5th highest death toll in the world, or the 3rd highest given population size, more than Spain and even America. Only Italy and Peru have more deaths per million. Still, at the same time, the United Kingdom is a leader in rolling out the coronavirus vaccines, 3rd in the world and well ahead of any other European country. It's been a great relief for many.
It's the end of the tunnel. I've been in isolation with my wife for over a year now.
It's going to be months before everyone is vaccinated and more lives will be lost during the wait. But fewer people will die if more effective treatments can be found. And that is where our guest, Professor Sir Christopher Edwards, believes he can help. Sir Christopher is going to tell us how he came up with a potential treatment many months ago and how he's been blocked from trialling the treatment by British bureaucracy and is only now able to start trials not in the United Kingdom, but in India. So Christopher, welcome to the Nexus. I know you're frustrated as you believe your treatment could have saved many lives. Tell us about the treatment and how you used it to help your daughter-in-law last year.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. And this is an important time, I think, because obviously, as you rightly say, if we could have a treatment which was effective, it could save lives. The story here goes back to the beginning of last year when this whole pandemic started. And I became very interested as to why it was that COVID was so much more lethal for certain subgroups of people than flu. What was it about? What was the difference between COVID and flu? And I came up with some fairly clear ideas to what they might be. And I was suddenly faced with a challenge. My daughter-in-law, as you say, went down with COVID, and then 10 days or so after she started, she had become very, very short of breath, and they contacted the NHS service 111 to get her into hospital. And I talked to my son and I said I didn't think they'd got anything to lose by going onto the 2 drugs that I was suggesting. And her doctor kindly prescribed them. She went on to the drugs and she avoided going to hospital. And after a week, she was much better. And then at 10 days, she ran out of one of the drugs and went downhill quite rapidly, went back onto that drug and then fully recovered and is now back to running every day. So she's fine. After that, I thought I ought to communicate with some key people about the ideas. And so I made a Zoom presentation to Sir John Bell, the Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, a key character involved in COVID, and Sir Mark Warport, the government's ex-chief scientific advisor. They were very kind and they made some very complimentary remarks about what I was proposing. In fact, Sir John Bell said it was the best explanation he'd heard for the complications of COVID-19, and that he was going out to buy the 2 drugs in case his family got the virus. They both agreed that there should be a trial, but unfortunately, Sir John was not able to persuade his colleagues in Oxford to add spironolactone that's one of the drugs, to the drug that they were proposing to use, which was dexamethasone. And I was proposing dexamethasone and spironolactone because they work together, and I had a very clear idea as to how they'd work. They wanted to give dexamethasone simply as an anti-inflammatory drug. And so they didn't have a trial. The numbers went right down after that, of course, and then I went by another route, the so-called accord route, and was unable to get enough people to actually start a trial. And so it looked as though the whole thing was going to gradually disappear. But it then became clear that we were going to get a second wave, and I then approached some people in Edinburgh, and they kindly, in fact, responded and came back with the possibility of doing a trial in Edinburgh. Again, they didn't have enough in terms of numbers of patients, and so that didn't get started. And it was very fortunate because Professor Dhaliwal in Edinburgh suggested that we might have a collaboration with a very big hospital, the MAMC hospital in Delhi. And that's the collaboration that we're actively involved in now, and we're just about to start recruiting for that study. I was also, in the UK, put in contact with another group in Liverpool called the Agile Group. And what they are doing is repurposing existing drugs. And both the drugs I'm talking about are commonly used drugs. And so I thought, that's ideal. That'll be absolutely fine. They came back to me to say that I didn't qualify because, unfortunately, I wasn't proposing to use the drug spironolactone at a supratherapeutic dose, a much higher dose than normal. So using a normal dose wasn't allowed. So that seemed to me the least agile thing I'd come across. So I'm afraid that we have faced in the UK a very difficult situation, which is most unfortunate. We have an extraordinary organisation, the Recovery Trial Organisation, which is very good when you get to the stage where you've got proof of concept. You now want to move forward with a massive trial. It's excellent for that. It is not good for the early stage as far as producing proof of concept is concerned.
Right. So, Christopher, you've mentioned 2 drugs there, dexamethasone and spironolactone. Now, you've helped us construct this short graphics report. Let's play that and then get a bit more focused on how these 2 drugs work. In this example, the SARS-CoV-2 virus enters through the nose. There, it attempts to penetrate our cells so that it can use them as a space to reproduce itself. To do that, it uses this spike protein to bind to what are called ACE2 receptors. The ACE2 receptors are damaged as the virus enters the cell and reproduces repeatedly, rupturing the cell, which is why the patient may lose their sense of taste and smell. The infection can spread down into the lungs, causing a dry cough, and in some people, shortness of breath. The next stage is the most serious. The infection can enter the blood vessels, And this is particularly dangerous for older people and anyone with cardiovascular problems, because they tend to have far more ACE2 receptors on the endothelial cells that form their blood vessel walls. So the virus has many more opportunities to attack. The damage to the ACE2 receptors causes the endothelial cells to release some remarkable entities called the Weibel-Palade bodies, which contains two key molecules, von Willebrand factor and the angiopoietin 2. In a healthy person, the von Willebrand factor forms local clots, which help us to stop the bleeding when we cut ourselves. But in COVID patients, clotting occurs throughout the body. As for angiopoietin 2, it damages the wall of the endothelial cells, causing them to leak and fill the lungs with fluid, suffocating patients in what's called acute respiratory distress syndrome. Spironolactone blocks the release of the Weibel-Palade bodies, and Sir Christopher strongly suspects that when spironolactone is combined with dexamethasone, the synergistic effects will prove remarkable and should save lives. So, Sir Christopher, this is a novel and original proposal from you to combine the two drugs. What makes you certain that it's worth a trial at least? And what is the likelihood of your combination, if it is found to be successful in your trials in India, of actually being useful to people in the United Kingdom and indeed around the world?
Well, I think one has to understand what is happening in these patients. They have 10 times as much clot formation as happens with flu. And these clots are all over the body. They're in blood vessels supplying the kidney, the brain, the heart, etc. It's very common to get clots in your leg and to fire those clots, in fact, off into the lung. And these clots are absolutely critical. If you can stop them, then that would make a dramatic difference. And so we're trying to stop them. The change in this permeability of the lung, of the blood vessels in the lung, the leakiness of these blood vessels is absolutely critical, because that's what causes people to drown. If you could stop that leakiness, then far more people would survive. So even though this is late, it's worthwhile us pursuing it, because if you can stop these two molecules from doing the damage that they're doing in the body, it could have a dramatic effect. And finally, I just want to make the point, we're all putting an awful lot of reliance on vaccines, but we're having to realize that this is a clever virus, which is changing all the time. And so what we have to understand is that if the virus changes, it may in fact no longer respond to the vaccine. And we'll still need then drugs which could interfere with this crucial problem that I've described. So I think what we're talking about is something which could be relevant for a long time to come.
Well, as you've mentioned, you are now working on trials in India to get this proof of concept. Let's bring in your colleague now, who's helping you with that at the University of Edinburgh, Professor Kev Dhaliwal. Professor Dhaliwal, thank you for joining us here on the Nexus. Could you just start by explaining how you're helping Sir Christopher to get his idea for a treatment tested?
So we collaborate from the University of Edinburgh with institutions in India, and Sir Christopher came to us with the hypothesis. We passed that hypothesis to other partner institutions because COVID-19 is a global disease, so we want to test this in patients wherever they are in the world. And an Indian institution is leading this study and performing experimental medicine, so taking incisive samples that we can measure to understand if we can perturb the pathway, and really to develop proof of concept as fast as possible so we can move forwards into larger scale studies. But we need to show really the biological proof of concept, which is what we've co-collaborated with an institution in India.
And it does sound encouraging given the anecdotal personal evidence that Sir Christopher's provided. But how long do you think it'll be until you can actually prove that it's effective or not?
So the plan is to do these pivotal proof of concept studies to really power a larger study. But in terms of proving the hypothesis, the proof of concept study should give sound data to prove that with the doses that Sir Christopher and the team in India are planning to use, that we can actually perturb the pathway. And that's really important, because in any disease, dosing timing is essential, and actually understanding if we do need to go up or down on the dose and the timing. So that's the first phase. So in terms of how long will it take, we expect, within a month or so to have really strong evidence of yay or nay, or what the next step is. And then really the plan would be to move into larger scale studies.
Right. During the course of the programme, Sir Christopher has expressed some frustration that he couldn't get the proof of concept test that he wanted in the United Kingdom months ago. Can you put a bit more context around that? And do you think that the trial system in the United Kingdom needs to be more agile?
So the trial system has been put in place over many years to safeguard patients, and there are processes in place, and they are incredibly bureaucratic. There's no doubt about that. There is a large amount of paperwork and individuals involved. What has happened recently with COVID, things have got faster. They've been expedited. So me personally, as a physician that does experimental medicine, it would normally have taken a year or 10 months to get some trials off from start to going. But it took us 8 to 10 weeks to get some platforms going. But what clearly happened within COVID-19, with the surge that occurred, was that really it was around the capacity of the system to cope with new studies coming in. I think that's what's very powerful about collaborating across the world, that there are enough patients to test hypothesis. But with Sir Christopher, we will also test hypothesis in the UK. But as he probably alluded to, the frustration is that there was a queue, and the queue was formed of hypothesis to be tested because it's such a new disease.
We were asking everybody we speak to, basically, if they think that the scientists looking for treatments and for vaccines are going to be able to keep up with the virus as it mutates. What do you know about that?
Well, so the virus is mutating in terms of its, and all viruses mutate over time. What's fundamental is that we understand what the consequence of that is. So in terms of vaccines, we know at this stage that the current, at least the data for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, is that they have tested in vitro that the vaccine, the antibodies that generated, will be protective against both the UK variant and also the South African variant. And the vaccines per se can be quite modular. So I think we are in a race, but we can modify them. Now, the thing about treatments are that with coronaviruses in particular, this is a similar presentation to SARS, MERS, and now SARS-CoV-2. And the pathophysiology, the way the pathogen causes disease, is actually quite similar. So approaches such as Sir Christopher's, or even other approaches that actually tackle the host response, will be conserved. So I think that's really an important piece of the jigsaw, that by doing these tests, these interventions now, we are safeguarding future pandemics with coronaviruses and similar viruses. But you are right to ask about the vaccine, and we are in an incredible situation. 300 vaccines have been started or in development. You've seen 3 or 4 have been approved already, with 5 or 6 more in development. And there's no doubt that nimbleness of now vaccine development will be a legacy of this pandemic.
I want to say a particular thank you to Professor Dhaliwal. I spent 15 very happy years in Edinburgh as the Professor of Clinical Medicine, and it's wonderful to be collaborating with you. And I wanted to say a personal thank you for the link that you've established with Delhi, because nothing could be more indicative. This is a global pandemic, and being able to link research across the world, I think, is a wonderful, positive thing to be able to do. So I very much hope that it works.
Well, on that positive note, Professor Sir Christopher Edwards and Professor Kev Dhaliwal, thank you so much. And we do wish you all the best of luck with that. We'd like now to bring in a third guest, Professor Dinesh Saralaya. He is leading the UK's recovery trial at Bradford Royal Infirmary. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on the Nexus. We'll ask you about how the trial is going in a second, but I just wanted to ask you what you made of Sir Christopher's proposed treatment using those 2 drugs together.
In the UK, dexamethasone is used as standard of care for severe COVID-19. We knew that the recovery trial in 2020 showed that when you use dexamethasone, you reduced mortality by 24 to 25% in people on oxygen therapy and about 33% in people who required CPAP or non-invasive ventilation and invasive ventilation. Now, currently, the recovery trial has recruited about 24,000 subjects across the UK, and it's by far, by a great distance, the largest COVID-19 treatment trial in the world. Currently, the trial is open to all UK patients admitted with COVID-19 into hospital. It's only for hospitalized patients. Now, standard of care in COVID-19 includes antibiotic stewardship, so when we use antibiotics when needed, oxygen therapy, and dexamethasone as standard of care. The dose we're using in the UK is 6 milligrams once a day for 10 days or till the day of discharge, whichever comes earlier. Now, the recovery trial goes on to find out more additional arms, so it's an adaptive open-label randomized trial. So the current arms continue to be standard of care, which is the treatment that they would receive within the NHS. Then we've added an arm called with aspirin, the simple dose, it's the simple antiplatelet drug. Subjects receive 150 milligrams for 10 days, once a day. Colchicine, which is used in the treatment of gout. Regencov-2, the monoclonal antibody produced by Regeneron, which we know a very important person got tremendous benefit in October. And then we've got convalescent plasma. These are the 5 arms. We are not using spironolactone in the UK as standard of care in patients with COVID-19, but we've got extensive experience and the successes that dexamethasone offers our patients.
Now, the point he was making is that the recovery trial is marvellous, but it's a huge, slow-moving vehicle. And the British medical establishment and how it works with the government is not really set up. It's not agile enough. It's not able to allow people like him to come forward and to speed up the trials of their suggestions of treatments that may well be able to save lives. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
I don't think it's a fair criticism. I think the NHS has listened very well. In fact, I would laud the NHS for actually, and the NIHR, which we should not forget, the National Institute for Health Research, which is the research wing of the NHS, for actually having urgently public health badged several studies. So I think the UK is far ahead of many other countries, in my opinion, in the research effort into COVID-19. In fact, it's the UK which gave us the first treatment for COVID-19. We know that various other treatments like ivermectin, azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine have shown, certainly the recovery trial showed that azithromycin doesn't work. Hydroxychloroquine certainly doesn't work in severe COVID. And it has been helped to guide many, many countries across the world. Today, in fact, dexamethasone is standard of care in every country across the planet. So I can't see why we are not adaptive. We do it much more rationally, I think. We basically look at the evidence which is available in front of us. Then we discuss it. We have a national committee which looks at any amendment to the recovery trial, and then we do it in a way, judge it by the benefits.
Just a very brief question for you. Do you think medical scientists like yourself and those hunting for the vaccines are going to be able to keep up with the virus as it changes and mutates?
So that's an excellent question. I've been involved with the Novavax trial, and I'm a principal investigator at Bradford for the Novavax trial. We recruited 726 patients. Now, as you know, there are 3 licensed vaccines in the UK. The first one was the Pfizer, which is now being the vaccine which is rolled out. We've heard close to 2.5 million people have been vaccinated as of yesterday. The other 2 vaccines are Oxford, which is shortly going to roll out as well. Very easy to administer, cost effective. And then we've got the Moderna, where we purchased a very small number of doses. But I suspect all of these vaccines, it's like buying, let's say, a washing machine. And I say in this generic content that it will do the job. But whether you have the specs which you need for individual customers is anybody's guess at the moment. But I think the vaccine which has been developed will work against the variant. Work is ongoing to look at what the variant has done in terms of changing its morphology, but how the vaccines are effective against that. And we will have an answer in a few weeks' time about that. But judging by the evidence that we have, I think the existing vaccines that have been rolled out will be working against the variant. But there is what we call a time lag of several weeks between vaccinating and actually seeing the benefit, because we can see what is called vaccine escape. Vaccine escape means that, remember with Pfizer, by the time you vaccine, it takes you about 10 days to develop the first signs of an immune response. It could take up to 4 weeks to develop a good immune response. And we know that the UK is giving 1 dose. We think it will be about 4 weeks by the time people get a viable influence. But I think the approach of vaccinating everybody with a single dose is right, because you're able to cover a large population, segment of the population, and protect the most vulnerable population where the deaths have occurred. You've heard that it's the 75-plus-year-olds who have been most vulnerable to COVID-19. And if we can vaccinate the whole proportion of it by mid-February, I think it's the right thing to do.
Professor Dinesh Saralaya, thank you so much for your contribution once again to the Nexus. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, you can see this episode and all our previous episodes on our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.